Hello everybody. So this week's lesson is on taking a landscape and looking for a specific kind of landscape and using predominantly yellow as the underpainting. So I'll show you the kind of references you want to be looking for in just a moment. But first, I think many of you are familiar with doing a sunset silhouette. So for example, on this one, you wet the paper and you put the colors, usually warm colors, in the background, and then when it dries, you can add more layers of darker colors on top. So it's similar to that. This is an example of one where it had warm colors in the background. When it dried, I added the trees in a darker color. You could also pick other subjects. And the idea is that as you add the other layers, the yellow, or the orange in this case, is glowing through. So you want to keep that in mind, that it's like pieces of stained glass being added on top. Even on this animal picture that started out as an orange, I left some of the original color, but you can see that that original color is showing through even as you add the other layers. So keeping that in mind, here's some examples of some landscapes I did. Here's just a little mini one where you can see that the yellow was applied first, and then as you added other colors, and the top did just have blue, it didn't have yellow, so you can have areas that don't have yellow really, but you can see up to about here there's yellow, and then as you add blue to it, the blue mixes with the yellow and becomes green. So here's one I did out on location when we were traveling, and most of this lower half had yellow. Wherever I had I wanted to leave white, I either left it and didn't paint that part or used masking fluid. Here's another one done on location. You can see that it's mostly yellow. So on these darker colors, they were added on top, or possibly I left them. So the kind of reference you want to get as you look for it is something that has a lot of yellow in it or greens, and a minimum of cool colors. So on this reference, I created this painting, and you can see that yellow is glowing through underneath. You can always put, if you think of your color wheel, you can always put green on top of yellow. You can put orange on top of yellow or red on top of yellow. It'll become orange. If you put blue on top of yellow, it will become green. If you have a lot of really cool colors and you put it on top of yellow, it'll get muted. So right in here, you have sort of a purple, as it showed in the reference, and that actually became sort of a gray color because of the complementary color mixtures. So here's one I did recently, and I will show you that on the Google Classroom and probably show it to you in class too. And you can see that there's a minimum of cool colors on this. It's mostly yellows and related colors in the background. Here's another one. And when I did this, I masked out the glow on the top of the sheep. I may have even masked out all of the sheep too. I can't remember. But it doesn't matter. I could have easily put yellow everywhere and just left that masked out. And then as I could have put a purple here, and that would have changed that to a gray, because it's complementary color. Here's another one I did. So this is the kind of reference you're looking for, and I'll have a bunch of them for you on Google Classroom so you can see. If you have a blue sky, it actually doesn't matter. You could still put yellow in the sky too. It'll just be a more gray sky as you go over it with other colors. You don't really want a green sky, so you got to be careful of that. Here's another one you can see. And again, it doesn't matter if this ends up being yellow. You're not copying the picture exactly. I would probably leave that out and just pick the parts that you think are important. You're interpreting these. And this one I finished. I'll put an example of that finished piece on the Google Classroom. Now check this out. It's a small one, but you can see you don't even have the sky showing. So if you have a higher horizon and you zoom in on just the foreground, or if there's mountains in the background, you could get a really nice painting without any blue sky in there at all. There's another one that I've done recently. Okay, so what I've decided to do for this demonstration is this reference. And this was up above, oh, where's the town where Dudley's Bakery is, and near Ramona. But anyway, there's a hiking trail that you can go up. It's part of the Coast to Crest Trail, and as we finally got to the top, I looked down, there's this magnificent old tree. Actually, this is a better one. I don't know if the shine will bother you, but you could see you're looking down. This is a little tiny tree and a little trail off in the distance and distant mountains, and I thought I'd give this a try. So we'll see how it comes out. There's never any guarantee. I've sketched it in lightly, and I took a photo of this so I can put it on Google Classroom so you can see the initial stages. There's a lot of scribbly stuff, so I might want to go in with my kneaded eraser and erase a little bit of this here and there, just so that I can still see it, but it's kind of a ghost image. Now here's a word of caution. Pencil isn't a problem, but if you have a preliminary drawing that you have transferred onto this, and I suggest doing your drawing before you start the underpainting of yellow, and then build from there. But if you've used graphite transfer paper, Sorel paper, it has a tendency to disappear and wash away as soon as you put the wash on. So if you've transferred it, then take a pencil and go back over your lines a little bit. They don't need to be real dark, but you just need to be able to see them. This is going to have yellow all over it, so I want to still be able to see my original drawing, and I'll of course have my reference handy, but you don't want it to wash away. Okay, so I've got several yellows, as I hope all of you do. I've got New Gamboge. It's that more of a school bussy yellow, and I've got Lemon Yellow, which is closer to the green side. New Gamboge is closer to the yellow, the orange side. And then I love this there's plenty of other yellows. This one is Naples Yellows. It's very opaque, and I use it for mixing skin tones. It's got a lot of white in it, so I tend not to use it too much. But this is quinacridone Gold. Isn't that lovely? It's an earthy yellow, but it's got a lot of brilliance to it. So now what I'm going to do is wet my paper first. You don't have to wet your paper first, but I think that will give it a softness. You just have to remember to have lots of pigment when you are working on a wet paper. So here my pencil is not disappearing. If I had used graphite transfer paper at this point, I may be losing my drawing. Might be disappearing. Also, if you have a lot of smudges, like if you use graphite transfer paper, or if your hand was all black from drawing with pencil, a lot of pencil, you want to clean that up first, because once paint goes on graphite, it kind of seals it in. So you don't want to have a lot of graphite smudges. Okay, so here I go with my yellow background. And as far as the sky, I might lift out some clouds, and I might put a little bit of blue up there. And I should go ahead and have that blue ready, but not too much really. Here's some cobalt blue. I'll have that handy here. So my plan is this dark can definitely have yellow under it. All of this orangey color can have definitely yellow under it. The purple mountains are subdued, so they can have yellow under it. We don't want a bright blue. And of course all the green will have yellow under it because you can just add blue or I can add green. And I'm leaving out this part of the tree. It's a little distracting. It looks like a dinosaur or something. Of course, that's me. I always see little tree creatures. So just be kind of loose. I'm going to try different yellows here. This is mostly going to be green from the trees up in here. Maybe I'll throw in a little bit of blue at this point up in the sky. It's turning a little green because I had green in my brush. I mean yellow in my brush. And it's okay to interpret the colors. It doesn't matter if it's not exactly the color that you had originally started off thinking that it would be in the reference. So I like those little clouds in there. So I'm going to take a Kleenex and just kind of lift out some clouds. And I always like to clean off the tape so paint doesn't run, or paint or water doesn't run back in and create a background or a blossom. Where if I wanted a really bright green somewhere, then I would be using more of the lemon yellow. Since New Gamboge has a lot of orange in it, and I'd add blue to make a green, it's going to be a duller green, with a more earthy green. If I want a bright green, I'll stick with the lemon yellow if I know that bright green is coming up. And I'm going to go off the page because I don't want to have white edges. Any place you think you might want white, you can lift here with the tissue, or you can lift with a brush. So I take a damp brush and I can lift out some areas. Yeah, but I don't really see any need to do much lifting here. I think I'm happy. The only part I don't like is this sky right here. I think I'm going to go stronger and then lift out. As I said, I'm going to lift out some clouds. And that gives it a nice little accent of blue there. Okay, now my decision is, okay, I've got a lot of greenery on the tree. So at this point, I can go ahead and add some of that blue or some green. And I'm going to go with more of a turquoisey green because that will give me that blue that's a little closer to green. That'll give me a brighter green. And doesn't have to be all that way. So let's get a bigger brush here. And this is tree foliage, so it's really sort of nondescript. This is peacock blue I just used here. And this is actually another tree or something over here. It looks like a manzanita. And I might even want to get into some ultramarine blue at this point, because this is a pretty deep, dark green up here. And I can always add that later. Here's a more limey green. I have this nice spring green here. I can use some of that right in here. And you want to get variety. You don't want to have everything looking the same. Down here on this part of the tree, I have some. This is going to be real loose, and then I get more and more defined as I progress into the painting. Start off with loose and get more descriptive later on. I'm going to take my flat brush, and right in here I see a nice strip of green. I'll put some manganese blue right in here. And since I know this tree is going to be fairly dark, I can just go right over it so it doesn't look like I stopped abruptly. I get that nice flowing look to it. And off in the distance here, I've got some little dabs of distant trees and so on, which are getting kind of big. I'll have to go back over them later. I love this little guy here, this little tree that shows, and that'll be real defined, so I will definitely, it should be able to be read as an oak tree. Okay, time to put some more, maybe some peacock blue down here. This is the grasses and so on in the front. This is starting to dry now. I'm going to take a fan brush. Here's a fan brush. And it's dry enough that it can actually show some of this texture right here that's going to be in the foreground. Get a little darker blue, get in there with the ultramarine. I'm using kind of a limited palette. I'm not using tons of colors here. When I get to the tree, I've got to think about what kinds of complementary colors I'm going to be using to create those grays and kind of a blackish gray. Okay, and let's use some salt. Quickly, I want to take a quick picture of this at this point. Okay, so I can save that for later and put it on the Google Classroom so you can see the stages. I'm going to add a little salt wherever the foliage is. Then later on, as it's drier, I'll be using some natural sponges to dab on some foliage. Okay, we'll see how that progresses. I got some interesting cloud formations there. Okay, so, you know, I would say 7/8 of the paper, that sounds pretty mathematical, but about 7/8 of the paper has got yellow on it. I'm already hating this fact that these two clouds are exactly the same, so hopefully I can break that up a little bit and have one a little higher. I might have to do some scrubbing later. I don't want them to look like they're exactly the same, and it might even be covered up with some I have to be careful that I don't put wet into this right now, or I'll get all kinds of background, so I can scrub it later. Okay, so I'm going to blow dry this, and I will do some editing if we need to. Here. See, the salt is starting to do its work right here. I always tape down my paper about a 1/4 inch or maybe 1/8 of an inch in, so if I decide to frame this later and I need to have a matte window cut, the framer needs to have a little bit of the painting to grab onto. So that way I won't be composing. If you don't use tape, you should at least draw a pencil line to show where the edges, where you don't want to compose beyond that, because that's going to be covered up by the matte. Now it's still a little damp. I might be able to do some spattering with clear water to get some more backgrounds or blossoms. I'll try it with a brush here. Might be a little too dry. Boy, that salt really worked good. Let's try with a toothbrush and see if I can get any little mini blossoms. It has to be sort of damp, but not completely dry for the blossom spattering to work. And I think it might be a little too dry, so that you have to kind of watch for that half dry where the shine is gone, but it's still damp. Now I could at any time spatter with just paint. So you can create sort of a little bit of a texture that way. It kind of gives, it's kind of fun. So you can either spatter with a toothbrush or with a regular paintbrush that you dab on something else. It's always fun. You want it to look like a painting. You don't want it to look like a photograph. At least that's my opinion on this. You know, there's some beautiful photorealistic painters out there. But at some point you say, okay, wait, why not just blow up, take it to the photo place and blow up the photo and hang that on the wall. You want it to look like it's got a little bit of your personality in it. Okay, let's make sure it's really dry before I start in on the tree. So I don't want the tree branches are hard edged. I don't want to see a fuzzy edge, a furry tree. Now also the salt should not stay on there. So you want to get rid of that salt, brush it off. Okay, I think it's dry enough for me to do some of the background. So you're kind of working from back forward. So I'm going to do some of these really distant mountains here. And then I'm going to dry that and then kind of build forward on that a little bit. So I need to have pretty much of the blue. I'll use a little cobalt and verdure. Okay, one thing, not only should you have a sponge, but it's a good idea to have a little test paper just to test out your colors. So there's my blue. It's going to go over a yellow, so it'll turn kind of green. I might want to throw just a little bit of red handy here. So it's a little more purple. So as it goes over the yellow, it will get a little more muted. So I'm looking at now what I'm going to do is make it a graded wash. I'm going to hit it while it's still damp with just a damp brush and drag that down and soften it, so I don't have a hard edge there. And I'll blow dry that. So everything that's going to go on top of that, including this foliage, will be covering that up. So I don't care if I go right through that part. So I'll go a little bit darker for the next layer of mountains. And I can overlap that a little bit. And then again, I'll soften it so it just kind of disappears. That graded wash kind of thing. So you're starting to see that this is, you know, 25 miles away. This is maybe 10 miles away or something. So again, I'll dry it. It's kind of nice to see that little soft mist in between the ranges of mountains. Now I definitely want to go a little bit red because I do see some purple. So I'm not actually trying to copy this, but I'm being influenced by what is there. And I could give this same photo to everybody and everybody would have a little bit different interpretation of it. So now that I've added red, I definitely am going to need to put some of that red or purple somewhere else in the painting, just for unity. I see, and I'm really getting microscopic here, but I see a little bit of green trees behind that. So I'm going to take a tiny little brush and go in and make a dark green. This is a nice way to make dark green. Use phthalo green, which we're going to have handy later on. It's way too garish to be used in nature by itself. But if I put a little bit of burnt sienna in with it, make sure that's my burnt sienna. Yeah, this is my burnt sienna here. It becomes it sort of neutralizes it a little bit and becomes a nice dark green. I can add a little blue to it too, a little ultramarine blue. So now I have a nice deep green. Yeah, maybe a little more burnt sienna. Yeah. So I'll go in. I don't want it to be too dark, so I gotta mute it a little bit with water, or lighten it up with some water. The more water you add, the lighter the value is. And there was actually a little bit on this foreground here too. Soften. Okay, so I've got starting to get that nice sense of that way off in the distance kind of thing. I'm going to use some of that purple again and show just a little bit of trees. Maybe some trees kind of, and a little green added to it. Some little distant trees heading up the hillsides and little clusters of trees off in the distance. Very small. Add a little more yellow to it, because that yellow is pretty light right there. And some trees just kind of climbing up the hillside. This is such a pretty area. And there's a nature center right along the highway there too. You can go in. Okay. I'm going to use a little spring green. And let's get a distinct. So if the bottom of it is straight and the top of it is wiggly, then that might mean that there's a hill or a section of a hill covering it, and these are just sort of peeking up above that hill, which is kind of what I'm seeing. So this is like a little hillside here. Always want to keep adding new colors into it so it's not just one color. So I'm getting some of that distance going on in there. This is going to be more orange, so I'm going to add a little bit of Scarlet Lake and Permanent Rose in there. And there's a little bit of a pathway, so I'll leave that path clear there. And then as soon as I put down this color, I want to soften the edge of it. Not worried too much about the tree. This is almost purple there, so maybe add a little bit. I actually have a nice purple color. This is violet gray. Let me double check if that's what it's called. Yeah, violet gray. And I think I'll put it right next to the tree where I see a little bit of that right there. And some orange. So there's a show coming up at the Municipal Gallery. It's called it's a local color show that they have every year. And this year it's called Primarily Yellow. So that's why I wanted to kind of have you guys try this lesson, and maybe you would want to enter your painting into that gallery show. So where I'm going to do the tree, I want it to be nice and dry. Okay, you sort of have worked your way up, eating your vegetables and so on, and now it's time for the dessert, which is the focal point, the tree. And then I'll be adding some more of the foliage too. I probably won't finish this painting on this demo, but at least you can kind of see how I'm going from foreground or from background to foreground. So it's time to come up with some colors to create that grayish tree. If you are making a muddy color by mixing complementary colors, red, green, blue, orange, purple, yellow. If it's more of a warm mixture, like red and green both are both, they have yellow in this one, and red is a warm color. The two primaries that are warm are red and yellow. The only primary that's cool is blue. So if you mix blue and orange, you only have half warm and half cool. If you mix red and green, let's see if I can make this sound mathematical, you have just a quarter that is a cool color, because green is half yellow and half blue. So you have 1/4 blue, 1/4 yellow, and 1/2 red. And the same with purple and yellow. Purple is 1/2 blue and 1/2 red, and then yellow. So it's a quarter red, a quarter blue, and half yellow. So that mixture. So really the most sensible mixture that'll give you a gray, which is a cooler mud, would be to use a blue-orange kind of combination. But you can certainly have other colors in there. In fact, all of the complementary mixtures have all three primaries. It's just the amount that you're using. So I'm going to start with, and I want it to be dark, so ultramarine blue is my very dark blue. And here's my warm colors that I'll just go ahead and smoosh those around and add a little bit more of the Scarlet Lake, which is the purple color. Get a little bit more of that New Gamboge. So I'm already, because of the blue that was in my brush, I'm already getting a pretty nice brown there. Also, burnt sienna and light red are both browns that are very orangey. So and this of course has a little green in it, but it doesn't matter. So I could start out with a predominantly bluish color and then add on top, or I can mix them on my palette. So now I have to be careful because I want it to look kind of gnarly. So I'm going to use a big round brush, and I can shift down into a smaller brush. It needs a little more blue, so I'm going to put a little bit more blue with it. And I think I better use a smaller brush. I'm liking that color. This looks like it's another piece of the tree twisting behind it. So I think I'm going to just kind of leave that part by itself for right now. I love how when that yellow is glowing through a little bit here too, especially on the lighter parts of the tree. And it does look like it's a little lighter, a little more sunlight on the left side there. Now I gotta be careful how this tree sits into the ground. It's got grasses, so I'll indicate that it doesn't end in a hard edge. It's got a little, I'm using a palette knife, and so I better keep going here. I love this weird little knot going on there. It's nice and light toward the front of it, and then it goes around, and it'll be real dark in the middle. So as I work my way up, I really like having that yellow shining through. I'm going to actually use a little permanent rose and get a little of a purple feel to it in there too. And I don't know why, it just felt like that was a good thing to do. And you want your tree to be entertaining and colorful. It's got some little fungi or something growing on it, so I might throw a little salt or something in there. Now the round brushes are nice because as you lift up on the pressure on them, you can get a skinnier line. And then I'll show you a really nice brush, this rigger brush that's really fun to use for little skinny lines. But this will come to a pretty nice point. Now before it completely dries, I can scrape into it and create some tree bark texture. A tree will tend to get skinnier the farther it gets from the ground. Each branch as it leaves the other branch will get a little skinnier. So this branch right here is going to be thinner, leaving the thicker branch, and as it gets higher up into the sky, it's going to get thinner. So I'm adding some more warm colors to this here. Gotta be careful not to have my pencil line showing too much, so I sort of have to be cautious of that. A lot of that will be covered up by some green. Okay, I think I better grab my palette knife and just see if I can get a little bit of texture. If it's really still wet, it'll create a darker texture. You can see how the paint is running back in and it's creating a darker texture. And if it's almost dry or half dry, it'll get a lighter texture. I'm sort of alternating between warmer and cooler mud throughout this tree branch. Little branch a little broader where it breaks away from the tree. I mean from the other limb. Okay, I'm gonna wait and add more of that later. I'm gonna actually lift a little bit here. So I'm going to take a paper towel and a small flat brush and get all the excess water out of it. I'm going to try and lift that little light area around that knot, because that's kind of an interesting little section there. And there's also a knot down in here. As an artist, we want to look for those irregularities and so-called imperfections maybe that make it not look like a machine made it, but like it came out of nature. So there's going to be different irregularities to it. Okay, I'm going to stop the tree right now, and I can always add more later. For the grass, I will probably go in at some point and use the fan brush again, which I kind of, here it is. So I'll use some green right out of the tube here. There's a little bit of spring green and a little bit of viridian. And I could add some grasses. I gotta be careful that it doesn't get too clumped up. It's a little bit dark. I don't like it to be quite that dark. So I'll add a little more water to my brush. So we'll be doing some of that eventually for the foreground with more detail. I can get in and put a little more detail in these little trees off in the distance. Want it to be kind of light, and it has to. Somehow have to make it look like a little oak tree. It's got a nice little shadow under it, so I'm gonna see if I can get the trunk on there in the shadow. So Santa Isabel is the town I was thinking of. It's up past Lake Henshaw, and it's a nice little trail. And then you can always go get some apple pie and Dudley's bread when you're done with your hike. This is a horribly uphill hike. First time we did it, I was going, oh, I don't want to do this anymore. And then we said, okay, just to the top of the next hill, just to the top of the next hill. And we were so pleased. Actually, when we came to the very top, we came to a big pasture of cows, which totally excited me. Cows! So the second time we did it, we sort of knew what to expect. Okay, I'm going to do a skinny little cast shadow under this tree. So hopefully it'll be identifiable as one of those little oak trees that are out. I don't know if it's an Engelmann or the other kind. So, you know, those kinds of things off in the distance will help give it that depth, like you're looking down on it. And I'll have to have some more foliage here. Besides scraping, I can use my fan brush also to create texture on the trunk. Okay, I don't really need too much texture. And then the last thing I'll show you before we quit here is just how to apply a little bit of the foliage. I'll get a really dark green going by using that phthalo green again and some burnt sienna. Be careful, Dan. I get wild with my colors here. So let's test that out. I need a little bit more. So that's a pretty nice deep green. I can also mix ultramarine blue and quinacridone gold and get a lovely earthy dark green. I really like that one. So I can dab. It's almost like pointillism, and I want to really fill that in. Dab. I've got some large areas here, so probably what I'll do is actually fill that in. I want it to be a little more neutral. So the opposite of green is red. So I'm going to go in with a little red and neutralize it a little bit so it's not quite so bright. And maybe a little more of that manganese blue. Sort of blew it up a little bit. So that's going to give me a base for some of the real more masses of green. But then I have to texturize it a little bit. So I can add salt, and I can dab in some little water for backgrounds. And a nice thing is to take a little bit of the lemon yellow. I'm going to get my palette here. Use the top of my palette. And kind of dab in some lemon yellow, and it does a nice thing in that really dark green. It sort of separates it. Because one thing about foliage is you don't want it to look like it's a solid color. Even though it may be predominantly solid, you want to have some variety to the texture of it. So this is one way to do it. And there'll be some more branches down in here. And or I can use my sponge, natural sponge. I get it wet first, squeeze out all the water. It's too crispy if you don't get it wet first. And then dip it in a puddle of green. And you can add that to the texture. And there's going to need to be more branches here. So I'll be filling in a lot more green. I'm going to also cover up some of that branch. So I don't want it. Some of the foliage is behind the branch, but a little bit of it might be in front of the branch. And so it's starting to come alive. This will be a nice branch that I'll add later, that this one coming right here, and work some more on this, and maybe even throw in a different kind of a plant here. This has got broader leaves. It's not really the oak leaves. Okay, so I'm going to stop there, and hopefully that gives you an idea, and I'll definitely work more on it, lots of hours probably, before it's completely done. But hopefully that'll give you the idea of a yellow underpainting and working your way up into farther and farther into the foreground, darker and darker. Okay, have a good time with this. Little water. Spatter, spatter. All right, see you later.